Hey everybody, my name is T, and today we're talking about learning tunes by ear. In my video a couple weeks ago where I talked about getting rid of your real book, one of the things I said that's really important to do is start learning tunes by ear. That's something you should be working on all the time, trying to build your repertoire, trying to develop this skill, and really continue working on your ears throughout your career as a musician. Getting started learning tunes by ear can be a really daunting task. It's much easier to use a book or Pro or something like that on the gig and really save yourself the trouble of having to learn a ton of tunes by ear and have this big tune rep. But it is something that you should be working on. It will definitely improve your skills as a musician, and it'll certainly raise your status with the musicians that you play with. Now, I know that it's very difficult to know every tune out there that people are going to call, and there's always going to be a case where somebody calls a tune that you don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know that every once in a while. It becomes a problem when you say, I don't know that a lot. But if you work on learning tunes by ear at a pretty consistent rate, and say you're able to learn 2 tunes a week over the course of a year, you quickly have a tune rep built up of 100 tunes. And there's a lot of ways out there that you can kind of pad the numbers by learning tunes that are really similar, tunes that are contrafacts, tunes that have easy forms, simple melodies to memorize. But every now and then you're going to be on a gig where somebody calls a tune like 3 Views of a Secret, and you're probably going to have to pull out either Pro, hopefully they will have brought you a chart that you can read, or somebody's going to have a book that you can look off of just to handle a situation like that. But for jazz standards, you should have a pretty good rep built up of those tunes just so that you can interact with the other members of the band and not have to worry about reading the music. So you can understand some of the different changes that people might be playing, some of the different versions, and be prepared for harmonic improvisation that might be happening on the bandstand. One of the first things I'm going to suggest that you do is you go out to the local jams or go out and listen to some people in your community who play jazz a lot and make note of the tunes that they're playing. Every area has different tunes that commonly come up on either jams or gigs based on the musicians that are in the area. It's important to know these tunes, know who's going to call them so that when you get called for a gig, you're prepared and it looks like you've done your homework and you're ready to go up on the bandstand and play with these people. So today we're going to go over the basics of learning tunes by ear and getting started in doing this and how you could find some tunes that are going to quickly develop your memorized repertoire. Let's go about this in a 5-step process. Our first step is choosing a tune. Today, our tune of choice is going to be There Will Never Be Another You. So we're going to talk about all of these steps in relationship to There Will Never Be Another You. The first thing you want to do when you're checking out recordings of this tune is determine if what you're hearing is somebody's particular arrangement. Is there an intro that isn't normally part of the tune? Are they playing a tag to the end of the head that maybe isn't part of the normal tune? Those are things that you got to find out first. The best way to do that is try and find several different versions of the tune played by different people and see if you're hearing the same thing on that tune multiple times. If it becomes obvious that several musicians are starting the tune right on the front of the melody and somebody else isn't, then what they're playing is probably an intro to an arrangement that they've worked up. And you want to learn primarily the melody of the tune and the form. So our version of our tune that we're talking about today, There Will Never Be Another You, is coming from the Woody Shaw album, Solid. There is no intro on that tune. They start right in on the melody. So now that we've determined that there isn't an intro on this and Woody Shaw is starting right on the melody, we can move to step 2. Determining the form. One of the first things that I do when I'm determining the form is try and figure out where the melody ends. For this, listen for maybe a break where the soloist is going to start the first solo of the tune. Check for a drum fill or maybe a tag that's part of the arrangement that the musicians have worked out. You're listening for some kind of cue that the melody has ended. Another thing you can do is count your way through the form and see if you can figure out how many measures have passed before you get into the solo section. 2 of the most common forms that you're going to run into are 12-measure blues and 32-measure forms of some type of A-B-A-C, A-B-C-D, A-A-B-A, something like that, that have regular 8-bar form structures. So if you determine that your tune has a 32 measure form and then you hear soloist start, no return of the melody, then you're working with some type of 32 bar tune that's going to fall into one of our previously stated form structures, like AABA or in the case of our tune, There Will Never Be Another You, A, B, A, C. A great way to get a feel for what the form of a tune is going to sound like is check out Cannonball Adderley playing Opera Vav on the Poll Winners album with Wes Montgomery. Cannonball plays a really clean version of the melody, and it's only one chorus, so you hear one formal structure of the melody pass before the soloists start. Opera Vav is a 12-measure blues head, and you can clearly hear the 12 measures pass and then soloists begin. This is the same type of structure that we're going to hear in There Will Never Be Another You, except the form has been elongated to 32 measures. It has 4 distinct 8-measure sections that are broken up by segmented melodies. On There Will Never Be Another You, our form is actually A, B, A, C. This is a different form than something like I've Got Rhythm or A Rhythm Changes, which is an A, B, A type structure. The melody returns every time you have an A. Contrasting material to that is represented by other letters, B, C, D, E, maybe F if you're talking about a more complicated modern tune. Tags on melody or extensions of the melody are not part of these formal letter designations. So a 36-measure tune that might have a 4-measure tag at the end is still going to be considered an A prime type tune, something where that other section is not being designated by a letter, but it's just an extension of the 32-measure form to give the tune a little bit of variation from other 32-measure tunes. And don't forget that 12 and 32 are not our only formal structures. Tunes can come in all different kinds of measure lengths. We have 16, 20, 24, 64, 72, 56, 48 measure tunes. But our most common forms in the jazz repertoire are going to be 12-measure blues and 32-measure AABA, ABAC, some type of formal structure like that. So let's talk about the melody and the form of There Will Never Be Another You. It has 2 A sections broken up by contrasting material, the B and C section. The A material occurs over an 8-bar section of the tune, and it returns after the contrasting material of the B section. Here's the next part of our melody. Another 8 bars have passed. So now we've played an A and a B section before the second half of our tune starts at measure 17 with a repetition of the A section. That's the end of the second A. 8 measures have passed. Here we go, the last 8 measures of the tune, our C section. And we have one whole pass through our melody. We've determined that the form happens over 32 bars. There's 4 even 8-measure sections, and they're broken up with an A section of melody, contrasting material B in the second set of 8 measures. A returns for our third set of 8 measures, and our final section, C, is more contrasting material, the final 8 measures of the tune. Step 3 in learning a tune by ear is really learning the melody. And this is probably the most important part of learning a tune. Being able to really memorize the melody, being able to sing along with it, know exactly what those pitches are, and being really comfortable with the melody is going to be the most important part in determining how well we know this tune. Our first step is listen to the melody a bunch. Listen to how Woody Shaw phrases it, listen to how he plays through it, and see if you can get to the point where you're able to sing along with him. You don't necessarily have to hit all the pitches, that's pretty negotiable, but you want to have an idea of what they are. You also want to have an idea of the rhythms and articulations that are being used in the melody. It's okay to slow it down if you need to. YouTube has a slow down function where you can take it down to 50% or 75% and listen to the melody and try and pick up some of those pitches that may be a little difficult to hear at full speed, especially if the melody is being played pretty quick or has a lot of eighth notes or triplets in it. When possible, go find versions of the tune that have lyrics and see if you can learn the lyrics to the tune. If we can sing the actual lyrics to the pitches, one, it makes the pitches easier to remember. Two, it makes the song easier to remember. And finally, we're going to need to determine the key. The two most important aspects of determining the key are really where the tune starts and where it ends. Almost always, the last chord of the tune is going to be your key. But a lot of tunes also start with some type of move to the 1. A tune like Just Friends starts on the 4. In our case, we're talking about an F, so B flat major, before a B flat minor, E flat 7 backdoor change brings us to the 1, F major. For our tune, There'll Never Be Another You, we start right on E flat. That's our key. We can determine this by figuring out what the root note is of that first phrase of the tune, seeing if we can find out if it's a 2-5 to E flat. Is it some type of backdoor to E flat? Are we starting on a chord that's diatonic to our home key? Like maybe we're starting on the 6, C minor, or the 4, A flat major. Maybe the 2, F minor. Most often, the best way to check yourself on whether or not you're hearing the key correctly is what happens in those last couple measures of a tune. When you find the ending of the melody, see where they're ending. There's a lot of tunes out there where the last note is actually the root of the final chord. Take this one, for example, where we actually end on E flat after a 2-5 to E flat major. That's a dead giveaway that our key is E flat major. More than anything, this will just help you put the melody in some type of context. Now that you've committed the melody of this song to memory, and you've started to work it out on your instrument and you've found all the pitches, you can probably sing through what you need to be able to play on your instrument and find the pitches without actually having to listen to the recording. This is going to be essential later when you're playing this tune from memory. If you can remember the melody, it's going to give you the form. It'll also help you get through the changes, and it'll give you something to work off when you're trying to play a solo. Once we've gotten to that point, we're going to move to step 4, which is figuring out the chords. The first part of that is determining the root movement that the bass player is playing throughout the tune. Often, at the top of each measure, you're going to get the root of the chord being played. If you determine that you're hearing maybe 2 chords being played in the measure, usually on beat 1 is going to be a root, and beat 3 is going to be a root. Keep in mind that this doesn't always hold true. Sometimes the bass player will be playing a melodic walking line, in which they're using slash chords or choosing a note from the chord diatonic to it to create a bass line with some type of stepwise motion. An example of this would be if I was playing a 1-5-1 type chord change, the bass player might actually go E flat, D, the 3rd of 5, and then back to that E flat. It's really easy to be tricked into thinking that this change then is E flat major, some type of maybe D minor, back to E flat major, when in fact it's E flat, B flat, E flat. Back to our tune, There'll Never Be Another You. The root movement in this tune is very common. We start on E flat major 7, and you don't really hear that change for 2 measures before we hear this D, G, C, or a 2-5 to the 6 of E flat major. Then you clearly hear this kind of motion. Chromatic movement down to a B flat. And then again we have this type of 2-5 motion to an A flat major 7, the 4 chord. And then the bass doesn't move, so what happens there? We're still getting an A flat, but now it goes up to D flat, back to E flat major. So we've mapped out this kind of root movement. So maybe slow the tune down, keep going through it, and trying to figure out what the rest of that root movement sounds like, what it looks like, and what we're possibly hearing. If early on it's something that you need to write out, go ahead and write out the root movement. See if you can put it in measures. Write yourself a chart with 4 measure staves, and then try and fill those in with what the roots are. Because in step 5, we're going to go back and we're going to use some of the melody to try and put some of these chords together. So one of the first things that we want to do in step 5 is start to determine what these chords might be. We want to train our ears to hear specific harmonies, but that's kind of difficult to do. Not everybody has perfect pitch, and it's not one of the easier things we learn to do as a musician. But it's pretty easy to tell the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. So right off the top of the tune, you hear this sound. With that major third and major seventh, right there giving us that sound of a major 1 versus this type of sound. That dark minor sound. So our first chord, probably going to be major. Next, we're hearing a 2-5 to C, our 6. Logic is going to tell us that diatonically a 6th chord is probably minor. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but that means that maybe we have a minor 2-5 heading to 6. D minor 7 flat 5 diatonically would fit into an E flat major key. 5 probably going to be dominant moving to that 6, right? So what is one way we can test ourselves? First way to test ourselves is when you hear the D come around, play a minor third against that. So play an F natural against the D. See if you hear that clash horrifically with the chord. If you hear this type of sound, then it's probably going to be a major third against that D. But in this case, we're hearing a minor third. It's going to line up. F. The next thing we want to determine is what about that A flat, the flat 5 on the D minor 7 flat 5 chord. Is that an A natural? And there we're going to do the same thing. Play an A flat against that A natural and see if you hear that clash. Again, if you hear this type of sound, then it's probably just a plain old D minor. But in this case, it's not, and we're going to come back to why in just a second. Have our 5 chord, again do the minor third, major third test, just to double check your ears. And then here we have this minor 6. What do we think this is? Diatonically it's probably minor, but again, do the minor third, major third test. See if that third is major or minor by listening for that clash. This is a great thing to do when you're going through the tune. Check each one of those chords. Double check the 7th by playing it against what you're hearing in the recording. Play a major 7th and a flat 7th. Play a major third and a minor third, and work on determining what those chords might be. First, see if you can hear it, and then test yourself. Double check. The next thing we can do is we can use that melody to try and piece some of these things together. You've worked out the root movement. We know it starts with an E flat, and then we have a 2-5 to C. Well, can our melody help us out with any of that? First of all, the melody is pretty diatonic to the key of E flat major. Start out with a B flat, the 5th, C, the 6th, D, major 7th, E flat the root, got an F, the 9th, G, the major 3rd, up to the 5th. So early on, we're talking this melody is super diatonic to the key of E flat major. So since we have a G natural and a D natural in the melody, this has to be an E flat major type chord. Major 7, major 9. From there, we have this D. So by testing our minor third, major third, we determined that this was minor. But is it a natural minor or is it a minor 7 flat 5? Let's return to our melody. Nothing in there says that we're leaving the key of E flat major. That's all E flat major, right? And on that F, which is where our 2-5 happens. So this is probably an A flat. giving us a minor 7 flat 5 chord to a G7, where we have that change from C to B in our harmonic structure that's being played by the piano player. That gives us a 2-5 to C. And this, we're going to find out, is minor and not a dominant 6. It's going to be a minor 6, again based on our melody. So it starts on the 5th, a G of that C minor, down to the minor 3rd, E flat. That tells us our 6 is a minor chord. And then next we have that walk down to B flat, where our melody note is a C. So we determined we had a 2-5 root motion to the 4 in A flat. Our melody note stays on C, giving us this minor 9 type sound. We tested our 3rd, and we determined that this was a D flat on the B flat chord, giving us a B flat minor sound. And then we have this voice leading motion of the A flat, the 7th, moving to the 3rd of our next chord, but the C is still there. So our root motion going from B flat to E flat makes this an E flat 13 dominant chord moving to the 4. And it's here where our melody actually moves to the key of A flat. So we start using this A flat that we were avoiding when we were in E flat major. That 4 would be the natural 11, or the one note you want to avoid in a major key, because the 3rd is going to clash, giving us this sound. Not great. But here, we start hearing it in the composition. Woody Shaw really lands on this, gives it a lot of emphasis when we move to that 4 chord, because it's an important note. In this way, you can use the melody to work through the tune and figure out what happens with some of the chord changes. A really big part of this tune is figuring out what happens when we land on the A natural in the melody in the B section, towards the end of the second 8 measure phrase. Leading up to that, we had a D, G, C, down to F. This A natural is not diatonic to anything that we've heard prior, but in a C minor F7 type way, it gives us an F dominant 7 before moving back to an A flat to give us this 2-5 type sound back to the second A of the tune. So just tracing what this A does in the melody, we get a lot of information regarding the chords around it. That's a lot of information to work with when you're trying to learn a tune by ear, just by finding a clean recording of the melody and a great band playing really clear changes. I can use all this information to help me determine what happens in this tune, and then once I have that melody memorized, I can put it all together pretty quickly, and then I have the tune down. I'm not going to need a book to ever play this tune again. It's part of my rep. This tune is fairly complicated to start out with learning by ear, but it's not that difficult. You should also think about adding filler material. Challenge yourself to learn 2 tunes each week. And you're going to learn one tune that is a pretty standard 32 measure tune, and the other tune you're going to learn is maybe something a little bit easier. Something like Sonny Rollins' Doxy. It's a 16 measure form. It's pretty easy to figure out by the melody and the root motion. Another tune, Song for My Father. Fairly easy melody, really easy changes to pick out. A tune like Jody Grind or St. Thomas. These are tunes with fairly easy melodies, fairly easy changes to work out, and shorter forms. If you put one of those tunes together each week with a standard like Stompin' at the Savoy, On Green Dolphin Street, There'll Never Be Another You, There Is No Greater Love, All the Things You Are, Autumn Leaves, in no time you'll have a tune rep built up that is going to get you through pretty much any gig with most musicians. I know this is a touchy subject to talk about, but it's something that I felt I wanted to touch on based on my previous videos that I've done, and I wanted to give some people some pointers for doing this. I don't have perfect pitch, so I know how hard it is to get started doing this, but once you do it for a little while, it's pretty easy to start doing it on your own relatively rapidly. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to put the little subscribe button down here for anybody who wants more of these videos that I post each week, and I hope to see you all next week.